It is hard to believe, but the PlayStation 2, I feel, is now a nostalgic console. And as you can see, I have quite a few PlayStation 2 games, and this is probably about 70% of the collection. I have a stack elsewhere in the house. And I started thinking about the PlayStation 2 recently because the laser in my PlayStation 2 Slim broke. And it kind of hit me, life without the PlayStation 2, that's kind of a sad prospect. And I found a replacement laser online, and I'm going to repair it. And I just feel like the PlayStation 2 is a fabulous console. It has a certain magic to it, and I think it represents a turning point in the history of gaming. I think the PlayStation 2 is the final expression of the era of gaming that I grew up with, which is starting with the NES, and I think, again, ending with the PlayStation 2, a console where the predominant business model was to make great games, make impressive games, and sell them on the basis of their quality. Now, unfortunately, with the internet era, that has become somewhat more problematic. Games are not just self-contained pieces of entertainment. They're online services, they're digital economies. And while that can be interesting and that can enhance certain games, it does bring up several problems, and I've talked about that on other videos. But really what I wanted to do is go through my history with the PlayStation 2 and just enjoy the walk down memory lane, talk about why this console is significant, and highlight a couple of games that were important to me. So when I first think of the PlayStation 2, the overwhelming thought that I have is that it was really the last console where you could just walk into a store, pick out a game, and find something new or interesting. Now, that may seem perhaps a little negative or a little simplistic, but what I mean is, today, there, I think, is a kind of limitation in choice when it comes to games. Games are really expensive to make, and if a company invests in a game, it's developed and marketed in such a way that you pretty much know whether or not that game is for you. And I always felt with the PlayStation 2, the PlayStation 1, the SNES, and the NES for the most part, these were consoles where I could just walk into a store, and granted, majority of those consoles were pre-internet, or at least pre-internet as we know it today, and I could sort of browse the stacks and just find something that looks different or interesting, pick it up for a reasonable price, and enjoy the process of exploration. And the PlayStation 2 was really kind of the heyday for that mentality for me. PlayStation 2 came out when I started college, and its life more or less ended when I was a working professional, when I had my first job. And what I did throughout that whole time was I would go into a GameStop, and wherever I was living, whether it was the one near my campus or the one near my houses, things like that, I would just, on a Friday night, I would drive to GameStop, go in, and just browse the pre-owned sections. And you would find games, that were $9.99, $14.99, and up to about $17.99. That was kind of the price range that I would look in. And I would just say, hey, in that range, I'm gonna take 3 games this weekend. Gave it no forethought, just went in, picked them up, and I really found some gems that way. I found some games that I wouldn't have otherwise purchased new, and it was always just a fun Friday night. Go home, grab a pizza, drink a couple beers, and play through 3 games that were kind of completely random and see what I got. It was kind of like a treasure hunt. And some of those games are going to appear in this video. Like I said, franchises and genres and games that, you know what, if I had to pay full price, I would have just passed them over. But before we get to some of those interesting finds, I want to talk about how I first experienced the PlayStation 2, and that was in college. My roommate picked it up brand new. He had worked all summer, and he got the original, fat PlayStation 2 and Grand Theft Auto 3. Now, at that time, I had sort of been traveling back and forth to Europe, spent a lot of time in Europe as a college student, and so video games had kind of faded from my set of interests. Now, when I returned to the States, and this would have been my maybe my senior year, actually. Junior or senior year, I can't quite remember at this point. But anyway, I had to sort of moved in with some new people, and my roommate, brought this in one day. And he was working some kind of job, and basically was like, look, I'm not going to be around much. If you want to play the PlayStation, go ahead. And again, Grand Theft Auto 3, and he had, I think, one of the earlier Madden games. And when I started playing Grand Theft Auto, it was like a revelation. I was like, wow, games have come so far from the days of the PlayStation. It just felt bigger, obviously more mature. There was a sense in Grand Theft Auto 3 of a freedom that you didn't have really prior to any game I had played at that point. It felt that way. It felt like I could do things in this game that I previously could not do in any game on any console in any genre. And so I spent really that first semester in college, when he would go off to work and I happened to be in the dorm, I played through and beat Grand Theft Auto 3 and just played it again and created mayhem and havoc. So what a great introduction to the PlayStation. Now, I said he also had Madden. It was one of the earlier Maddens, but I have to talk about Madden 2005. This is maybe my favorite sports game of all time, and it's a very significant Madden as far as the Madden franchise, and then also for me personally. So this game came out in 2004, and if you remember, it came out to compete with NFL 2K5, which everyone thought was superior, and if I had to look at it objectively, yes, it was the superior game, and I had that as well. But I loved the Madden engine on PlayStation 2. I thought this iteration of Madden, still to this day, is the best ever. Now, 2004, again, I had just, I graduated college in 2004, had my first job, and after a long, long wait, my family got New York Giants season tickets, which, if you're in the New York area and you remember, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and really up until the mid-2000s, it was very difficult to get those season tickets. So we finally got them, and I got my seat. And I'm not even a Giants fan, but it was just, oh my God, we got these tickets. So I would go to the stadium for those 8 Sundays, and this was the roster from that season. So Eli Manning as a rookie quarterback. This game had a lot of the classic teams. You could create your own teams. I created a whole roster of all the great teams from the history of the NFL. It had a full-fledged playoff season where you can actually not only play your team, but you could play all the games in a season with stat tracking and a radio show talking about what was going on. It was just a very, very thorough and fun Madden game. And if you listen to that list of features, those are features that have been lost over the years with Madden. So I put hours into this, and it's just still one of my favorite games to fire up, and it just represents the PlayStation for me. Another great sports title was Smackdown, Here Comes the Pain. And this game was great because it had a crazy physics system. You could have one of those tables, ladders, and chairs matches, I remember, and you could stack the tables, a couple stories high above the ring and pull off a finishing move, and you'd come crashing down. It was just a kind of a broken system, but it was broken in a fun way. And in addition to that, I think this captures what I think is the last great era of the WWE. That kind of post WCW purchase, 2002, 2003. I guess it was after the brand split, but it was before they developed this bland corporate identity that they have today. And so you had, old WCW stars. You had the Attitude Era guys. You had the new up-and-coming guys like, obviously, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, things like that. And it was just fun to play that roster with this crazy physics system. And I still think it holds up today. So the PlayStation 2 had some tremendous RPGs, too numerous to even mention. But if I had to pick one that I think impressed me the most, it is Dragon Quest VIII, a game that I've talked about previously on the channel. But basically, I felt like this game captured, obviously, the great Dragon Quest gameplay, that kind of simplified, very, very traditional JRPG style, with graphics that, for the time, actually made you feel like you were playing an anime. And I think that, there have been a few games throughout history that it really has more to do with their timing than perhaps their technical merits, where you felt like, wow, I'm finally playing one of these Japanese animes. And I think for this time and place, that game was Dragon Quest VIII. I've said I love the environments in this game. It just had this lush, verdant feel to it. And it was a game that just drew me in. And again, it's one that I can turn on today and load up the save file or one of my save files and just play a little bit and grind and feel relaxed. And I think that's what Dragon Quest has always been for me, a game that is pleasant to look at, has that great orchestral soundtrack, and just relaxes you. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out the great compilations that came to the PlayStation 2. I'm showing you here the Art of Fighting compilation, which I really enjoyed. I always liked the Art of Fighting's kind of big scaling sprites. I thought they were impressive for their day. But there are so many others, whether it's the Capcom collections, the Taito collections, other Neo Geo games, Fatal Fury, you had the Mega Man series. Now, a purist will say, well, these may not be the most technically sound emulations, but if you just want a nice, playable collection of classic games, and I like just collecting these compilations. I think it's kind of a fun subgenre to collect on the system. And, these are examples of compilations, before they were sold at exorbitant prices on the eShop. It was, I thought, a good value. And plus, with some of the tech that's out today, like controller adapters and things like that, you can actually play these with some really high-quality joysticks. For example, the Vuelix that I have, I've got one of these adapters, plug it into the PlayStation 2, and I'm playing these games with a much higher quality controller than was possible back in the day. So that kind of breathes some new life into some of the classic arcade compilations. So now I want to talk about some of the discoveries I made in GameStop and other stores throughout the life cycle of the PlayStation 2. And the first one that I think is really significant for me is the Persona series. I had heard about Persona prior to the PlayStation 2, but I never really got into it. And I remember reading a lot of praise for Persona 3, and this is the FES edition. And I said, let me give it a try. I think I bought it used initially, and then I had to get a sealed copy because I liked it so much. This came out at a time when I want to say the PlayStation 3 had already been released, or that might have been Persona 4, but I remember picking up both of them in pretty quick succession. And to me, it was a new take on the classic JRPG genre. You still had turn-based battles, but you were exploring that Netherworld's region. You had the, card thing where you could sort of create your own summons and things like that. I liked the life simulation / dating simulation element to it. and how it connected to building your character for those netherworld battles. It just felt fresh, like, oh, someone's doing something new and different with one of my favorite genres. And, these games had terrific style. It was a game that kind of got me back into the anime culture, if you will, just trying to explore what was out there, because I hadn't thought about that sort of stuff since I was in high school. And, wonderful soundtrack. It was just one of those hallmark games on the system, and also Persona 4. I sort of see both of them together as, wow, for however much it cost me to buy them both, maybe it was $40-50 at the time, I got so many hours of fun out of those two games. Now, next up, I'm just going to give you two quick examples of games that may not have been wonderful titles, but that really, for the way that I shop for PlayStation 2 games, picking them up on a Friday and just enjoying them for a weekend. Castle of Shigagami 2, this is maybe not the best shoot-'em-up game, but it's certainly a lot of fun. And the way this was packaged, I think the same company did Mobile Light Force, and I have that as well. But these were kind of, bargain bin sort of games. You had no idea what they were. Got them home and said, oh, look at this, a cool Japanese shoot-'em-up game. So for a weekend, it was just fun to play this, and it had some enjoyable levels. It's, scratched the itch for that type of game, an itch I didn't even know I had, but because someone was like, what the heck is this? We'll just throw it in with the Barbie games and stuff like that. I got a great deal on a very competent game. Similarly, Auto Modellista. Now, this is not a great wrestling game, but look at the price, $2.99. So I just kind of picked this up one weekend, $3, worth a try. And what I got was a mildly interesting cel-shaded racing game that brought back memories of Initial D. And for that weekend, that was fine. Now again, long term, this is not Gran Turismo, but it just was something that was fun for a weekend, and it was $3. That's an experience you cannot get today. And sometimes as you searched through a GameStop, you'd find something that was just so different and so unique that you grew to appreciate it as a terrific game, and that is Victorious Boxers. Again, this is something easily overlooked. What the hell is this? It looks like, a little chibi boxing game. But what it was an anime-style boxing game. I think it was based on a manga called Hajime no Ippo, if I'm not mistaken. But, that wasn't necessarily the most important part. It was a well-animated sports game, but its claim to fame was that it really was a technical boxing game, and for the time, arguably the best boxing game on the market. Now, there are not a lot of boxing games, and they're hard games to pull off, but you really had to pay attention to your footwork, your pacing, whether or not you were throwing a counterpunch. You had a, parry. It really was a tough system to master, but it was very rewarding to go through that career mode. And when you unlocked all of the fighters, then it was actually a fun fighting game where you could sort of pick all of these boss characters and just go at it and learn their intricacies. So it offered a lot of replay value, and it's a game that I return to from time to time and still have a lot of fun with it. After the PlayStation's life cycle had officially ended, I discovered importing for the PlayStation 2. And it turns out that the PlayStation 2 was, I think, one of the first consoles that allowed you to play imports in a relatively easy fashion. You didn't have to solder anything. You didn't really have to do much other than get a swap disc. And so there's a swap disc, it's called Magic Disc, and it was just, you had to do a little modification with the PS2 Slim. I think you had to put some electrical tape or like a crumpled up little wad of napkin in the slot that locks the top on, so that the system really couldn't see if the top was open or closed. It would just, you'd think it was always closed. Then you'd swap the discs in and out. And once I saw that, I said, you know what, I have to pick up King of Colosseum. And what this was a 3D version of Fire Pro Wrestling. I had read about it in a magazine. I had seen some footage of it online, and I said, wow, if it's that easy to import, I must pick up these games. It was, 2 separate discs, and it had different rosters, and it had a lot of the American wrestlers that were in Japan at the time, and I was just, I was like, oh, this is going to be a great game. Was it a great game? Not really. It was very kind of difficult to play. The control system just wasn't as fun or fluid as the Fire Pro games, but I felt playing this game was like, wow, I am experiencing something that most American wrestling fans are not experiencing. And so just the experience of getting this game, or both of these games, made me really enjoy importing. And I'll show you some of the other import titles that I picked up. Probably the coolest import title at the time for me was Fist of the North Star by Sega. This was a 2D fighting game based on the Hokuto no Ken series. And it was an Arc System Works fighter, one of the early versions of the system that I think we now know as BlazBlue or Guilty Gear. I mean, Guilty Gear preceded this, but it just had that kind of balance, those multiple layered fighting systems, but it animated beautifully. Again, it was another example of a game that was functionally an anime battle. And it came out in 2007, I believe, so hey, PlayStation 3 was already a year into its life, but I got it on the PlayStation 2, and I felt like it was a real gem of a find on that system. And incidentally, it was, I think, one of the first games I imported from PlayAsia, which at that time was kind of like a new upstart. So, and I've certainly purchased a lot from them since. But great game, still worth playing if you like 2D fighters. And lastly, Fate Stay Night, a really great fighting game from Capcom. It's a 3D fighter, but it has a lot of the same 2D style control mechanics that you had in Street Fighter. I know nothing about the Fate universe. I take it this is a really, really popular anime. Never got into it, but you don't need to. Each character is different. The stage design is excellent. The soundtrack is excellent. And it's just one of those games that you're like, I guess I know why they didn't release it here, because most of us, at least at the time, didn't know what Fate was. But just as a fighting game, just as one of those classic Capcom fighters, it really succeeds. And it was one of those games that you just felt lucky to know about and to be able to play on the PlayStation. So I would still recommend it today. And again, it's one of those titles that really benefits from playing with a high-quality controller. And since you can do that today, it really opens up a lot of possibilities for fighters that you may have said, well, feels pretty good with the joypad, but plug in the controller, it is a new experience. So there you have it, my personal history with the PlayStation 2, and one of the reasons why I love this console so much is that it's been with me for such a long time. From my undergraduate years in college through today, when I'm, I'll just say in my mid-30s and, have gone through quite a bit of living at this point, and I'm still discovering new ways to enjoy this console, as I said. Finding adapters that will allow me to play with the latest arcade stick hardware and rediscover some of these old games and play them in a new way. So I feel like there's still a lot to discover. There's still games to import. There's still titles to play that I haven't played. And I just want to keep this collection going for as long as possible.